Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Read Hevos, where I take stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called And They Smiled, written by Eyeball440. A child takes a step, unsteady with youth, into the bustling mall. Years from now, they will not look back and reminisce about the good old days. They won't think about the toy store up on the second floor, on the other side of the central atrium. They won't remember pleading with their parents to buy them various confectionery products. They won't wax nostalgic in their old age about living a life free of worries and maturity. Because the child has never lived that life. No child like them has, for a long, long time. Instead of wide eyes taking in anything they can see, asking all the wrong questions so that someday they can ask all the right questions, the child keeps their head down. They just need to get 20-odd feet. Then they can turn into an alley and back home to the underbelly. Only the authorities, who would much rather leave them be ignored than confront the facts of the matter. Out of sight, out of mind. Should one of the many mall-goers look a little too closely under the dark fabric that masks the child's face in shadow, first there will be a surprise, then recognition. Maybe the eyes are a little bigger than usual, the nose even less significant, but that's the face they see on the news, on the posters, in the stories parents tell to teach their own children the fear of disobedience. They all basically look the same, anyway. This time, it's only patronizing questions. The child, given a rare moment of compassion, takes the opportunity to escape before it gets worse, before other people notice. They slip away and squeeze through the gap between the technology repair shop and the family-owned restaurant serving local cuisine. Usually, the mall-goer is not so kind. There is a strength in a herd, stronger than any individual. So anyone that can hear the observant spotter will quickly know, and it takes only seconds for a bubble of space to appear, impossibly from the dense crowd out of nowhere. It is not meant to entrap the child, no. The risk is too great. What if it attacked someone? No. This isolation is for the protection of everyone else. It moves fluidly as the child walks 24 further steps to the empty, unnoticed alleyway. But given the protection of anonymity, someone always shouts and breaks the silence. A moment passes, then another. The whole crowd starts to jeer. They call the child many names, names customarily reserved for adults. Murderer, savage, predator. Segregation has worked its magic well. The great-great-grandchild of the enemy stands among them, and all they can ever see is the face from the many hours of historical documentaries and dramatizations when they studied the last great war in grade school. The face of their greatest foe. Human. The child's good mood, having successfully evaded an unpleasant situation, puts a spring in their step and a slight smile on their face. They pat the lumps in their pocket every few steps, and the smile remains. Tonight, at least, they will not fall asleep to the lullaby of their grumbling stomach. The ration balls are bland, tasteless, and without texture. They stretch just a little further than any natural gluten should, and are oddly heavy in the hand. However, one only needs to eat 2 a day, and they are ridiculously inexpensive. Someone who had not been born into this abject poverty would have likely been bored to self-inflicted starvation after a few weeks. But the child has it lucky. They never tasted anything else. In a little more than a week, though they did not know it, their parents are going to throw a small party for them. The child will have lived 10 years on the mile and 3/4 orb of steel and inches thick glass that they and a few thousand other humans call home. Arrangements have been made, favors called in, for the child to have a stew made from some extra vegetables left over from the soup kitchens for the poor of more desirable evolution. Flavor will explode on the atrophied taste buds, and sensations unheard of will ride the veritable food of emotion throughout their mind. Some minutes after the child leaves the mall, the crowd erupts into applause at the priority announcement of the Committee of Environmental Pacification, and the child's fate would be forever altered. They would never get the vegetable stew, with full support of the 5 houses. it was decreed that due to humans' refusal to effectively integrate with proper society and sustained unemployment and crime rate, the committee would sadly be forced to separate humans from any interaction with their benevolent conquerors. They would be relegated to heavily monitored regions on a selected set of planets and overseen by members of the CEP Enforcement Bureau to ensure continued safety for themselves and others. Not a single predator species survives on their home planet. Thanks to the committee, they have won a millennia-long war for trophic supremacy. This ethnic cleansing is simply the next logical step. They have finally found a solution to the human problem. The child, finally reaching the wide stretch of hallway the humans called home, turned a corner and found a nightmare. A sea of pristine white uniforms filled the halls between hovels and shacks, littering the maintenance tunnels of the station. Blue-gloved hands snatch children from weeping parents, pull friends and families apart, and no prized possession is left unconfiscated. The child stands in the shadow of the doorway, eyes wide, unmoving. They see glimpses of old friends and loved family, faces stretched in abject horror. Order begins to form from the chaos after a few minutes, and it becomes evident that the enforcers are corralling the residents into double-wide lines, surrounded by an unsettling number of weapons, and being let out. The child, in a previously hidden position, now feels suddenly exposed. The streets is no longer in chaos, and it is only a matter of time until they are spotted and brought into line. The child is finally able to move again, but they've barely turned their head when an enforcer shouts, and after a few seconds of overwhelming confusing movement, they find themselves in the line, staggering along with many others. The line of people, thousands long, snakes through the little used maintenance hallways and towards an even more rarely used void-side hangar, not nearly large enough to turn a profit on trading, and without any use to the planetary shuttle. The only settled planet in the system is found on the other side of the station. The hangar is cleaner than it has ever been before. Scattered empty containers no longer dot the edges of the room. Decades of scuff marks from when pilots think they know better than the computer have been buffed out and repaired if necessary. The 3 flickering lights in the corner have been replaced, and now all that rests in the space are a number of committee prisoner transport craft, far too few to carry all who have been rounded up like so much livestock today. This affair is a silent one. In the cavernous space, the echoing click of boots drowns out the muted shuffles of a subdued population. Between the enforcers, all that passes are concise orders called and blue-gloved gestures. The humans, similarly, remain quiet. It was demonstrated early on what happens to those who draw attention, much less incite rebellion. An order is barked out, much louder than those preceding it, to the huddled masses. Stand in rows. Gunge gestures aggressively, and the order is followed without dissent. All of a sudden, the child feels, for the first, but certainly not the last time, truly alone. Until this moment, there has been the promise of safety, a cowl to hide in, an unseen doorway to look out of, adults to stand between. 3 feet separate the child from the nearest person, and this room is terrifyingly agoraphobia-inducing. An unseen command passes between the enforcers, and a number holster their weapons and begin to systematically search the spacious grid. The child, unable to see around those standing around them, is not a witness to this. All they hear are footsteps and then people's shouts, angry and afraid. Those next to the child become agitated, joining the shouting, and the clamor reaches its peak. A shot rings out, and the empty cartridge strikes the ground with a clink. The grown-ups to the child's front are pushed apart, and a glove, red polka dots and light blue, reaches through and grabs the child's arm. The transports are filled with children, and only children. The child turns to look back, and through the shrinking aperture, the enforcer captain's arm drops, and even through the closed door, the thunderous roar of gunfire feels like a battering ram to the chest. Crying is a waste of water and will get you no pity in return. The child has learned many lessons in the years they've spent enslaved on this planet, save every single drop, and eventually you'll be rewarded for working hard. This planet should never have been colonized. The local star's proximity is the most pleasant of all its features. The complete and utter lack of surface water means night and day oscillate between freezing cold and unbearable hot, creating gale-force winds all day and all night. Dunes, thus, flow across the surface like waves in slow motion, and the only structures that remains above the sand must be hundreds of meters tall and shaped for minimal friction. The sand itself is the worst part. It's not the comfortable sand of idyllic beaches, nor is it even the unpleasant roughness of the rocky desert on the otherwise temperate planet. No, this sand is made up primarily of volcanic product, flakes of silicon and other toxic elements which lacerate any patch of exposed skin with shocking ease, and permanently damage your lungs should you breathe it in. Life was not meant to exist in this hell. Luck would have it, though, that the child was found to have some skill in repairing the various machines employed to harvest and process the silicon-rich ash, and was selected as a technician. As opposed to most of the workers, the technician has never traveled more than a few feet outside the spire, on the occasion that an outside filter projector needed to be recalibrated manually, or the sealing mechanisms had become jammed with debris. Years and years passed, and the technician rises in skill and standing. After successfully preventing a potential catastrophic battery explosion when all other workers had fled the area, the warden takes notice. The technician has not a single infraction on their record since the day they were taken, and has done nothing but work towards the betterment of the operations on the planet. The warden sees fit to reward their talent with significant promotion, an apprenticeship to a member of the emergency team. The apprentice's mess hall serves food, real food, and it is weeks until the technician is able to taste anything without overwhelming euphoria. The technician is given their own bed, a small alcove with a box to store personal belongings, though they have none, and there is even a water condenser on the wall of the room. Their roommates are running a black market water trade, precious fluid in exchange for various goods and services from those not so lucky as to have a condenser at hand. The technician disapproves. They should be using that water to improve worker efficiency, which is what really matters. The technician is so close to even greater success, why would they risk it all for a few extra comforts? A few days after the promotion, the technician is sent out with the team to respond to a distress call a few miles outside the spire. Upon arrival, it is reported that the distress call was due to a careless mistake made by a dispatch committee representative. They had failed to properly secure the tether when exiting the craft, and then sadly tripped on the way out and suffocated under tens of feet of ash. The enforcer of the emergency team was suspicious, but the collection crew, as well as the humans on the team, played up their innate predatory stupidity, all the while making no real attempt to hide the truth, and the enforcer just lapped it all up. As soon as the team was out of hearing range of the enforcer, they laughed for hours. The technician seethed in anger. The technician, a mere technician no longer, wears blue gloves and stands behind the right shoulder of the warden. Since their first encounter with the careless descent of the emergency team, they have reported hundreds of infractions to the warden and his enforcers. It was with their eyes and their hands that the countless attempts at rebellions had been put down before they could even begin. Now their hair had begun to grey. The ever-creeping onset of time has become shockingly apparent, only exasperated by the noxious fumes and inevitable ash particles that one breathes over the years. The right hand of the warden looks down on their own hands, and though their uniform is unmarred, brilliant white, and their gloves are spotless, the hand sees drops of red nonetheless. Because the day before, a shuttle had arrived with a new batch of slaves. One of the children had managed to escape their cuffs, and purely by accident ran towards the guard's weapon locker. The right hand acted with efficient expedience, years of training honing their abilities, and hit center mass on the target. There was no time for emotion, no time to judge what was and wasn't right, only the threat and its neutralization. The warden had trained the hand well, and the hand had been thankful. It had protected them in a way that nothing did when they were small. It had been essential for the continuing maintenance of the facility in the Spire. It had turned them into perhaps the most powerful human in the galaxy. But now that training had guided them to kill a child without hesitation, and they remember, for the first time in decades, the mass murder and enslavement of an entire species. They remember their parents' smiles, telling them to be careful in public areas, telling them they'll see each other later. They remember watching their best friend being beaten in front of them for stealing a candy that had in all actuality rolled underneath a passing hovercar and was crushed. The hand remembers, in a deluge of memory, being a child no older than the one shot dead the day before. They remember everything they had spent decades working towards: safety, food, power, being taken away by the very same oppressor that they thank for the pitiful scraps at the figurative table today. And they vow, as they are congratulated for their quick thinking and true devotion to the laws and goals of the committee, to do whatever it takes in order for no child to experience anything like this ever again. The news reaches the Spire barely a few days later. War has begun. Black-helmeted terrorist operatives of unknown origin have assassinated members of the committee and 5 houses on live video, and a fleet has reached the spineward border regions of the Empire. The Spire, being a vital manufacturing and prison planet, is reinforced with a significant portion of the Third House fleet and its garrison. The slaves are pushed harder than ever, working far too long with not nearly enough rest, and burnout is inevitable in the next few years. But the Warden is taking a calculated wager that the war will not last that long. The Royal Fleets are the dominant military force in the galaxy. With a significant portion of the fleet stationed above the Spire, security is tighter than ever, and quotas are strict, even for one such as the right hand of the Warden. Completing their task now will be that much harder. It's convenient that the oppressors bleed the same blue as the hand's gloves. Decades of war have passed. What was advertised as a quick campaign to display the military might of the royal fleets has become a war of attrition, and it is a war the houses have been losing for quite some time. When the slaves they rely on for industry are faced with the choice between being certainly worked to death or a possibility of escape, and when the invaders have demonstrated a distaste for slavery, more and more resources and enforcers must be devoted to maintaining internal stability. The child, who by now has not been a child for near eternity, stands at the airlock. It cycles before them. The whoosh of air behind 10-centimeter blasters muffles the tears striking the ground, and the whoops of joy of those not stunned to silence by sudden freedom now standing on the other side. Bones aching, the child turns around, weight resting on a pleasantly curved and decorative cane in their left hand, to look down at the barrel of a gun. The gun rests in a blue-gloved hand, an arm clothed in a white sleeve, the ivory sullied in burns and patches of blue and red. The tears still flow, faster than ever, precious water seeming to spill onto the ground in a torrent, reminiscent of long-forgotten Amazonian rain. A Marahastran waterfall, a snowmelt river among white-capped Scandinavian mountains. The Warden's hand twitches now in anger, and both sides of the standstill know that it is too late, far too late for either of them. Already the sounds of battle can be heard, drawing ever closer to the peak of the Spire, and those blue gloves have studied enough, killed enough, to know that those tears are not of sadness or of resignation to the manifest fate. Voices can be faintly heard now through the walls, orders shouted, assured in victory, just outside the door, breaching any second now. The child remembers every day of their life in this moment, a life of misery, obedience, and heroism. As the door disintegrates into fragments and the gun jerks and flashes, they smile. The fragments of the door fly into the room at supersonic speed, hundreds impacting the smudged grey back of the blue-gloved enforcer, and they are all killed nearly instantly. They continue through, passing over the form of a familiar, wizened figure, while blue joins red on the airlock door. 4 people, clearly soldiers, enter the now emptied room quickly and efficiently, and once it is clear that the threat is neutralized, gather around the 2 bodies. Lumps form in their throats, and each of the soldiers is quick to assign blame to themselves, for being too slow, for failing to get a secondary view of what was thought to be only an enemy combatant. They take off their black, faceless helmets and bow their heads. Because the four of them see themselves in the second body, they see a reflection of their own forward-facing eyes, sunken slightly into a flat face, and a carnivore's incisors and a herbivore's flatter rear teeth. With white hair, they hoped to live long enough to grow, now that the war was drawing to a close. A message reaches their ears that in the ship that had departed from the hangar just meters away were not the expected fleeing committee and forces, but instead a crew of escaped human slaves. They looked down at the creases around the eyes of the human on the ground, and the slight space between their lips. And the soldiers smiled too. And in the deafening silence, there was the sound of a teardrop uniting with its minutes-old compatriots. And then another, and then another. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Caspar Arnholtz, Draxoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.